Hey everybody, so we're now looking at something called an inheritance pattern, and this is talking about how does an actual individual's genes and its alleles affect its phenotype, so the physical trait that we actually see. And this inheritance pattern is called complete dominance, which is definitely the most common pattern, and that's why it's the first one we'll learn here. So inheritance patterns are, it's basically how does the genotype, so the alleles that an individual has, affect the phenotype. Okay, well let's go back to our little cats example again that we learnt about earlier. So in this example, we're looking at the character of fur color. The traits that were possible in this example, we had black fur and brown fur. So these are the phenotypes. And the genotypes that were possible, we were using the A to represent our fur color alleles here. So we had big A, big A. We can also have small a, small a. So they're both homozygous. We can also have heterozygous as well, which we didn't talk about last time. But that's the important one when we're talking about complete dominance. So we've got three little individual cats here. The first black cat here, it's got the genotype big A, and that's causing it to have black fur as its phenotype. The brown cat here, it's got small a, as its genotype, and that's causing it to have the brown fur phenotype. But this black cat in the middle here, it actually is heterozygous, so it's got a big A allele and a small a allele in its chromosomes. So one chromosome has big A, and the other copy of that chromosome has small a, the small a allele. So you can see that this cat here, it's heterozygous, but it still has black fur. So what we call this is that, what we say here is that black fur is dominant over brown fur. Black fur is dominant over brown fur, and that's because in this particular cat that's heterozygous, it's the black fur phenotype that we see. So in complete dominance, we're always looking for the heterozygous individual, and that lets us tell which of the phenotypes is dominant and which one is not dominant, which we call recessive. So we can say that the phenotype seen in a heterozygous individual is called dominant. And in our cat's example, black fur is dominant. And the other phenotype that you see is called recessive. Recessive. Okay, so then that means the only way for a recessive phenotype to actually be seen is if you have 2 copies of that allele in the individual. So the only way to get a brown cat is if they've got 2 copies of the small a allele. So that doesn't mean that recessive traits are less common in the population. Often they're more common, but it just means that's the only genotype you can have that's going to give you the recessive trait. And then finally, that leads us to why we use capital and lowercase letters when we're writing out the genotypes. So commonly, the convention is that we always use capital letters when we're talking about the allele for the dominant trait, and then we use lowercase letters for the allele for the recessive trait. So capital letter, dominant, and lowercase is recessive. All right. So this is the most common way that genes interact with each other. Sorry, that alleles interact. So for most of the genes we'll be learning about, we're following complete dominance, where you have one of the phenotypes is dominant over the other phenotype, which is recessive.